My name is Charles Bellinger. I teach theology and ethics at Brite Divinity School and Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. My goal in this brief talk is to explain how Rene Girard helps me to understand acts of violence by police officers against Black persons and how our justice system quite often acts as an injustice system. This is a picture of Girard. And he lived from 1923 to 2015. He was a literary critic and social theorist. He's known primarily for his theory about how violence forms and sustains human culture. I need to summarize his theory in a very small nutshell. He begins with the idea of mimetic desire. And what he means by that is human beings look around at other people and they see what other people are desiring, and then they copy those desires imitative. Girard sees this in the behavior of children and adults in many different contexts. He finds mimetic desire being unveiled or unmasked in writings of Shakespeare and Cervantes and Dostoevsky and many other authors. So mimetic desire leads to rivalry because if people are copying the desires of others, then they're both going to be fighting to possess the same object, whatever that is. So how does society prevent itself from suffering a general meltdown into chaotic violence? It does this through the scapegoat mechanism. A victim is chosen because they stand out in some way from the society. They may be a foreigner, they may walk with a limp, they may be of a different religion. And Girard has a lot to say about anti-Semitism in Western history. They may have a different skin color or tribal identity or something along those lines. So the victim is labeled as being guilty, as deserving to die for his or her crimes. This allows the community to feel that it is righteous and law-abiding, in contrast to the victim who is guilty. And this is the original act of othering or distinguishing us from them. I can give a very clear example of what Girard means by the scapegoat mechanism by referring to a book that's called Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. This was also made into a movie. And it tells the story of Walter McMillan, who was a Black man living in a small town in Alabama. In 1986, there was a young white woman who was shot to death in a dry cleaning store. And the police tried to solve this crime for several months, but they came up empty. After 6 months, there was pressure building up from the community to solve this crime, and the police and the DA decided that they were going to charge Walter McMillan, this Black man, with the crime. The DA found someone who could accuse McMillan of this crime, and even though this main accuser later recanted his story and said it was a complete fabrication, that it didn't matter. McMillan was found guilty of murder by a white jury, and he was given the death penalty, death sentence. So what I want to point out is that this is a classic example of what Girard means by the scapegoat mechanism. A crime has been committed. If the actual murderer cannot be found, then someone must be made to pay for the crime. A scapegoat has to be found to blame. But we need to realize that this is not a conscious phenomenon. Scapegoating is an unconscious phenomenon, particularly in a culture that's been so deeply influenced by Christianity for so many centuries. Because Christianity has at its core the story of Christ who was killed after being unjustly accused. In other words, he was a scapegoat. So Girard argues that not only do various forms of religion arise in the wake of the act of scapegoating, but there also arises the phenomenon that we call law and order. The law is intended to prohibit murder and prevent the chaotic proliferation of violence in society. And the judiciary is that aspect of the state which is trying to rationally control and manage vengeance. And the police are the thin blue line that is tasked with representing society in its continual struggle against uncontrolled violence. This is why it's so rare for an officer who kills someone to be indicted, and why even such indictments often lead to acquittals. It's only the most egregious cases that lead to convictions. One of the points that Girard makes is that violence is a phenomenon of reciprocity. And what he means by this is that in many situations, the violence from one group begets violence from another group, and the violent acts become an escalating spiral. The philosophy of nonviolence of Gandhi and Martin Luther King is a very conscious attempt to break this sort of escalating spiral. One of the great ironies of violence, as it is described by Girard, is that there's a psychic move of othering at the heart of violence. We are good, and those others we are attacking are evil. But when there's reciprocity as the primary driving force behind violence, then there's the paradox that the two opposing sides, which each have an attitude of self-righteousness and moral superiority, are actually becoming more and more like each other in their actions. They say that they are different from the others, but in their actions, they're becoming like enemy twins. This is why I think that if Girard were here today, he would not only denounce the actions of the police when they kill someone without justification, but also the actions of those who are throwing bricks or rocks at the police or shooting and killing them. I'm sometimes asked if I were to only read one book by Girard, what should it be? And this is the book that I recommend. It's called I See Satan Fall Like Lightning. And it has a very good summary of the idea of mimetic desire and the scapegoat mechanism and the influence of Christianity on Western culture over many centuries. I thank you for your attention, and I hope this has been helpful.